Right, let's talk about Super 6. There's 12,000 people in our mini league, and obviously every single week you get the chance to win some big cash prizes, all for putting in some football predictions. We're going to talk, lads, about why are there no signings in January?
It's surprising, isn't it? Particularly when you look at the numbers and you think about all the business that was done last year. Like Chelsea spent an absolute fortune last January. I think in fact, off the top of my head, I think Leeds did. Leeds spent about 100. Leeds spent about 100 million last January, and this year there's just nothing happening.
Liverpool signed Gakpo.
Like 26.
There's just nothing happening this year.
Yeah, I think clubs are scared of FFP. They've finally seen point deductions. We've not seen point deductions in the league, I think, ever, but at least in decades. And seeing Everton, seeing Forest, seeing Everton get potentially a second round of deductions in the next few months. Obviously on the kind of precipice is Man City's charges as well. I think clubs are a little bit scared and wait until summer to kind of get secure deals done in a more safer economic situation.
I think it's great. Like, I'm pleased. I would love the money that swirls around football to stop. I would love the responsibility of a manager, and I can make this about Pochettino. You know, Pochettino fairly recently spoke and went, I need more players. Like, hold tight. Didn't you just spend 400 million? Like, Chelsea spent $1 billion, but he spent 400 million. Is his responsibility not to coach the players that he's got, improve the personnel?
There are still gaps. That's the issue at Chelsea, though.
No, I agree.
There's still so many gaps.
But I would much rather that the managerial responsibility across football became improve what you've got rather than reach for the checkbook.
You know, when you say that though, Rory, and I think I agree with you. You want to see teams coach more. You want to see better coaching. You want to see academy players brought through. But with this FFP thing and stuff, they are kind of like incentivizing the sale of academy products. How many teams now, Man City, Chelsea are doing it. They're going, well, we're buying all these players, so now we have to justify it by selling our best academy. So now the best academy players at these clubs aren't even getting to come through because they're getting sold.
I think what's happening is the reason why they're having to be sold, if you use Chelsea as a case study, they're being sold because of mistakes that have been made in the transfer market. So the easiest way to solve those mistakes are through the kids. But what could happen in the future is that you don't make those signings to begin with, and therefore the kids are given a chance. Basically, this generation of kids are going to be really unlucky. They're sold to make weight for the signings that haven't worked, Koulibaly or whatever else. But in the future, you don't sign Koulibaly, and Levi Cole will just centre half that season.
But I think what you could start to see is like a cycle of this happening. Because FFP, is it 3 years or 5 years it runs on? 5-year periods, right? That the FFP runs on. So if you see teams at the start of that 5-year period, you might just get a 5-year cycle now. Teams just spending really big and then it takes a big dip. But what do you guys think? Do you think player values are going to crash because of this? Or could we just see more loans with options to buy and things like
spreading the costs along? Yeah, that might be a thing. I do wonder if clubs have looked at the value that the likes of Chelsea have got out of their players. It's a big example, and it's a very weird example. Not many clubs can do what Chelsea have done, and just wonder, do we need to spend that much money in January? Do we need? Because if West Ham were interested in signing Calvin Phillips, they've loaned him, and it's a good deal. Maybe we can talk about that later in the podcast, whatever. But if they wanted to sign him, that's 50 million quid. For Calvin Phillips. The prices are outrageous.
Yeah.
So I wonder if January is a reflection of the prices of players being crazy.
That could be the case. But do you know what else I think is also going to be the case? Say you look at Everton and Forest. They've got themselves into a massively difficult, tricky situation. Like, they're in stuck, both of them. And neither of them have done particularly well. I think a lot of clubs will be looking at what Brighton have managed to do and what Brentford have managed to do. Like, Brighton are a far superior club in terms of the running of it and the actual 11 out on the pitch. Brighton are better than both Forest and Everton. And yet they're totally operating within their means and maybe
making profit as well.
Exactly. Maybe teams are thinking about doing that.
You look at United though, the reason, obviously I know more about United because I look at it pretty much every day, depressingly. But the reason we can't buy at this moment in time in January, and it may be the same in the summer as well. So you got Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos who are coming in now, and they probably can't make many changes to the playing staff because we owe like 360 million in installments to teams. And until you start clearing some of that, you can't start. And a lot of these clubs will be in those kind of different positions as well. It's not just Manchester United, obviously, tip of the iceberg, really. A lot of teams are buying players, right, will pay it over 5 years. And their fortunes are changing or COVID happened or I don't know, loads of different things change. And you still have to pay for a transfer when the player's gone.
But do you know,
the player's left
and
3
the
years
other thing
ago.
is,
You've had to replace him.
It's quite good in a way that there are penalties, just because if you're incredibly wealthy, you can sign players and there's no real penalty to getting it wrong. So Manchester United are an example in the past. Chelsea, obviously, an example. And this goes over decades. So when Chelsea maybe signed, doesn't matter, does it? But Juan Sebastian Veron, it didn't work. It was a bad signing. At the time, it didn't matter. We just went out and I think we signed Thiago that year in order to just facilitate a new midfielder. You just make sure that wherever the mistake exists, you just rectify it. Whereas now, and rightly so, there should be a kind of penalty for that. So if you go out and sign a bad player, you don't do your due diligence, you don't do your recruitment, you get it wrong, you can't just basically paper over the crack and sign another player until you get it right. City did it, didn't they, with fullbacks? Wasn't there the famous situation where you kind of signed a fullback?
Keeper as well at the time.
Yeah.
Bravo was 15 million quid, and we signed obviously Edison for 35 shortly after that.
There was also fullbacks. I remember you didn't get it right with a couple of fullbacks and just kind of
record fees like Mendy, and then they got someone else.
Yeah, just kept buying fullbacks until the fullback situation worked.
Yeah.
I'm not attacking you.
No, I'm just trying to figure who that failed back was. There were a few, don't get me wrong.
You had like Kolarov, and you had like Mendy, and you had all these different players.
Well, we had Kolarov and Clichy.
I feel like in two consecutive windows, City spent 50 million.
You're right.
Yeah, I just can't remember the specifics. But basically, you shouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah,
and you should kind of live and die by what you do.
Your mistakes. Yeah, I agree, 1,000,000%.
So, but it'll be interesting. Do you think that we could see a market crash? Do you think that players' value, if teams are just not going to spend the money, so you said Calvin Phillips, let's use him as a case study, right? So Calvin Phillips, 50 million is what City want. If everybody decides that he's not worth that, everybody, so you're not getting 50. If the market tells you that he is worth 25,
yeah.
Does that mean that he is suddenly worth 25?
City's a weird example because ultimately City have taken less money for players at points and just let them go to facilitate their dream of leaving the club, whoever that is. But the issue for someone like Calvin Phillips and these new modern players and the contracts they're on, he could just sit there on the bench for 6 years.
That's the problem.
100 grand a week.
That's the problem.
It's not a bad life being the DM for Man City playing the League Cup once a year.
I mean, that's the problem that loads of clubs are going to have. Manchester United will find themselves in this situation. Chelsea will find ourselves in this situation as well.
I hope there is a market crash. I hope there is. I want players. When you talked about, I know Veron, we talked about Veron or Rooney went to United for 30 mil. It's an abstract amount of money. But when it gets to hundreds of millions for one player that doesn't even score goals like Caicedo, wow, football's in it.
That's the thing as well. Rooney was like the big transfer.
Yeah, Rooney,
there have been a few big, I know, but he was a big transfer that summer. Like, now these, like Chelsea,
it's exciting. He's a striker, he scores goals, he's Hollywood.
Yeah.
DM, centre backs going for
clearly, he was clearly like it was at the time, when he came through. Prior to him, it was Owen. It was like the stardust,
dead cert before.
Whereas with Chelsea, it's like Chelsea went and spent over £100 million twice on two midfielders who'd had like a combined tally of 100 games between them.
He might be all right.
He might be good.
Spent 80 million on him.
Yeah, Mikhailo Mudryk is the example for that. Yeah. Like with the other two, you can maybe make a justification. I don't necessarily agree, but you could talk about Fernandes, you could talk about Caicedo. Mudryk was
crazy. It's like the gold rush, isn't it? People just speculating there's a bit of gold in the desert somewhere in Nevada, and it's a bit like Caicedo speculating he might be decent at as a holding midfielder.
Yeah. No, it's
a holding midfielder should never be worth 100 million.
No,
unless Real Madrid said, "I want Rodri in his prime."
Holding midfielders in his
and he's 25 and in his prime.
Yeah,
even then,
Kante goes to Real Madrid in his prime for 100 million in today's market, as an example.
Yeah.
Generational
even
players.
Then, they really only your strikers.
Caicedo from Brighton.
I don't think there will be the crash though. I think it will just continue to exponentially.
Like Tulip Mania.
How many different things are you? So Gold Rushes and Tulip Mania and
.com crash.
Here we go.
The Ash Jeeves crash. That crashed. Couldn't answer any more questions.
Jeeves,
There's now over 12,000 of you have joined us in the official Club Mini League. So thank you for your support, and make sure you're getting involved by hitting that link in the description below and joining our Mini League. The code is Club23.